Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. We have quite a bit to cover today. We're going to talk about the obstruction that certain Democrat chairs seem to be putting up when it comes to the ability to address conservative policy and to prepare for the next session during the interim. We're going to talk about a Dallas Morning News article complaining about the infighting going on and saying it is what is causing us not to be able to work on policy. People like Carl Tepper and others who are concerned. We're going to look at something Shelley Luther said this week. We're going to talk about a letter calling on Jasmine Crockett to resign over her vote or push to take away Donald Trump or reduce Donald Trump's Secret Service. Guys, there's just a lot going on. Also, all the finance reports came out, and I haven't had a time to look at all of them, but I did at least pull together all of the campaign finance reports for the incoming and current returning members of the Texas legislature, and we'll talk about takeaways from those numbers. Quite a bit to cover today, so let's get to the show. Saturday was a really busy day for me. Had commitments in the morning and things to do around the house, and took my daughter out, took my son out. We went to the trampoline park, and then my wife had a wax mold class that she was taking, like making rings and like melting metal and pouring them into waxes and stuff like that. And then she got back, and we went out to another commitment we had, and then ran by HEB on the way home to kind of settle down for the evening. And on my way into HEB, it is reported that, it's such a different world we live in where all of us have access to things within a minute of them occurring, right? And so I'm on Twitter, and it's like maybe within 30 seconds, shots fired at Trump rally. So I'm actually in the middle of HEB getting some things for us to make for dinner, and just trying to get bits and pieces of information coming out, watching the videos probably at the same time that so many of you were watching them. And my immediate reaction, I'm not going to go into a ton of details on all of this during the show because y'all get a lot of your information nationally from other voices. The way I see the Luke Macias Show playing into your lives is that you don't come here and say, this is where I come to understand everything going on in the nation. Do I have opinions of those things? Yeah. But there's so many other voices speaking into that. So you can go and kind of take your pick from the national voice buffet of who you want to get that information from. But I will tell you that as somebody who's in their mid-30s, I think it's very jarring. It's unsettling when you see an assassination attempt, because for us, if you're 40 or under, basically, this is the first time you've seen this, right? You have not experienced any candidate in any major party in the United States have an assassination attempt on their life. And it kind of wakes you up to how close our nation is to outright civil unrest. We can talk about the civil unrest that exists, and some of that's due to the degradation of society. Some of it's due to the increasing chasm that exists between both political parties, and not just both political parties. We're really talking about two halves of society, right? You could take away the Republican and Democrat Party. They could both close up shop tomorrow, and the chasm would still exist from a worldview and basically a value set that we even believe makes up America. So our unity over certain core timeless truths is, let's say, less than it ever has been in recent history. But even amidst that chasm, we've had relatively I would say moderate civil unrest with these kind of rises. So Black Lives Matter movement kind of blows up civil unrest for a period of time, right? And there's various things like that that kind of hit and peak, and then they kind of die off and go back. But none of those things would cause the level of civil unrest and distrust in our institutions and in our nation and in our society as would a properly executed assassination of a presidential candidate. And then as a conservative, seeing somebody who I believe really will advance so many policies that would put our nation and state on the right track, it is unnerving to realize how quickly all that work could be taken away from you. And of course, in the aftermath, how seemingly intentionally incompetent the Secret Service was. So the reason I start our show with that is because I think it's important as we kind of go into everything else we're going to cover to recognize that Saturday evening we came very, very close to losing someone who is one of the greatest Republican presidents in modern history, and somebody who has now picked a phenomenal vice president pick in J.D. Vance. If any of y'all don't like J.D. Vance, please let me know. Just email me back in my weekly email, or drop a note. Go to lukemacias.com, fill out the contact form. I'm more than happy to talk to you all about J.D. Vance, but somebody who I have followed for a long time. I said this actually on Twitter. I said, or X, my wife doesn't like a lot of politics. She's not anti-political. She's just not, it's not something she consumes a lot of. But the political figure who she likes more than anybody else is J.D. Vance. She read his book, Hillbilly Elegy. My wife reads a lot, probably close to 50 books a year. And so she read Hillbilly Elegy before he ran for the United States Senate. Absolutely loved that book and thought it was phenomenal. Talked to me about it while she was reading it. When you read 50 books a year, I mean, I don't talk to her about every book she reads. So the ones she talks to me about are the ones that are more well-written and have a greater impact on her life and the way she views things. And so she absolutely loved that book. And then when he ran for the United States Senate, I said, hey, that guy who wrote that book, he's running for the U.S. Senate. She's like, oh my gosh. And so she actually followed along a little bit. And so I do think that J.D. Vance has a compelling story beyond that of the average American. I think that he aligns ideologically more so with an America First agenda. I mean, far more than a Mike Pence, but also more than Doug Burgum, who's probably almost, I would say, very comparable to Mike Pence. And then you have Marco Rubio, who's probably in the middle. Marco's more America First, less interventionist on a foreign policy side, more pro-family. Let's say family formation policies is another thing that Marco Rubio's talked about a lot that I think is really cool and very important to where we're headed. But I would put Marco to the right of Doug Burgum and slightly to the left of J.D. Vance. And so when you look at the spectrum of those candidates, J.D. Vance was the absolute best of those finalists that were on the list of being picked. And I honestly think that maybe that assassination attempt on Saturday put the nail in the coffin to secure his nomination, because it did provide some clarity to the reality that if Trump loses, and if you put somebody as vice president who can just quickly replace Trump and entirely upend the agenda like a Doug Burgum, then you would give even more incentive for people to continue to try to end the life of President Trump. And so I think J.D. Vance is a great pick. But in light of that pick and in light of Saturday's events, actually we had a bunch of state representatives and incoming state representatives write a letter to Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman from Texas. This is somebody who was well supported by House leadership when she was a Democrat. This is the open letter to her, and I'll tell you all the state representatives that signed on to this letter. Representative Crockett, Texans believe that regardless of party, presidents of the United States of America, both current and former, must be protected. Considering Saturday's assassination attempt on President Trump, which resulted in him being literally shot in the ear and in other innocent Americans being killed or injured, and since you, just 3 months ago, sponsored legislation, H.R. 8081, to remove his Secret Service protective detail, we, the undersigned current and future members of the Texas legislature, call on you to immediately resign your position in Congress. You have forfeited any moral authority to represent the state of Texas. And this was signed by Brian Harrison, Briscoe Kane, Mark DeRazio, Bob Hall, Caroline Harris, Davila, Andy Hopper, Kerry Isaac, Helen Kerwin, Jeff Leach, AJ Louderback, David Lowe, Shelley Luther, Don McLaughlin, Mays Middleton, Brent Money, Matt Morgan, Mike Alcott, Carissa Richardson, Schatzline, Kevin Sparks, Lynn Stuckey, Valerie Swanson, Tony Tinderholt, Steve Toth, Ellen Troxler, Cody Vasut, Wesley Verdell, and Richard Hayes. So, great messaging, very good framing and driving narratives. It's important for Republicans to point to all the ways that Democrats encouraged this behavior, that Democrats have created a scenario that would incentivize this type of behavior, and to realize that there are literally sitting members of Congress who represent the state of Texas who are saying, I don't even want President Trump to have a Secret Service detail, and are trying to push legislation to do so. So I'm grateful that that letter went out and got pushed. Something that also popped up last week, and this happened, I mean, after I recorded my show, like within hours of recording my show. So I didn't have time to actually pull the clips together and take care of everything that was going on at the time. But Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison were in their committee, which is chaired by Joe Moody. And this committee has jurisdictional authority over all of these criminal codes, right? So they, during the interim, can step in and work on any and all policies and have discussions around the criminal codes, crimes that are being committed, ways of strengthening the criminal codes, ways of weakening the criminal codes. Joe Moody has used this committee to make it easier for criminals in so many ways. That's one of the reasons he was put in this position, is he's been very strong when it comes to trying to be weaker on crime and more friendly to criminals. Okay. So as a Democrat, he's been handed that position by Dade Phelan and has worked hard to advance his agenda in his role. But Brian Harrison and Nate Schatzline did something that I have not seen a lot of conservative lawmakers do, and I hope continues. And in fact, we'll also talk about a letter that Steve Toth just sent to Abel Herrero following this exchange between Joe Moody, Brian Harrison, and Nate Schatzline. Before we get more into it, let's just go to the clip and let y'all hear or see what happened and transpired at the start of this committee. So let's go to this clip.
Before we get started, I wanted to offer up if anybody wanted to make any opening remarks, opening comments, or any questions before we start. Yes, Representative Schatzline.
Will there be an opportunity to discuss potential future legislation, maybe in regards to some of the issues we're seeing in regards to the most recent atrocities we saw at our border in regards to sentencing and issues related to some of the heinous crimes that have taken place?
My understanding is the bills related to border and crimes along the border went through the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee, and that's the committee jurisdiction for any bills that were passed. And so for their implementation and monitoring charge, I would anticipate that Chairman Guillen would go over that. As it stands now, we have the two charges related to anything that came through this committee.
Got it. So the Speaker would have to make another charge in order for us to discuss anything outside of that?
I mean, if you're talking about border security issues, those are
mine would be
the
more,
Homeland Security and Public
Safety. Mine would be more of like the criminal justice side of implementation. You know, the governor referenced at one point increasing the penalty for what happened at the border with the young lady just recently.
Yeah, as it stands now, we have two charges in front of us. One is related to human trafficking and criminal enterprises. So maybe let's have a discussion, and maybe there's space within the language that's in charge to have a discussion on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the questions from Representative Schatzline, as well as your opening remarks, that they're going to be, and I'm glad to hear opportunities at subsequent interim hearings to talk about fentanyl, doxing, and other things, and hopefully we can get border security and the violent crimes being committed by illegal aliens entering in our country.
I want to be very clear. Those bills did not come through this committee. They went through
Yeah.
Homeland Security and Public Safety. So I anticipate that Representative Gia and Chairman Guillen will be covering those topics.
Appreciate that and stipulated. But I mean, given that we do have as a committee broad jurisdiction for all criminal law in the state of Texas, I would like to move, or what other way would be most appropriate, whether it's a request or a formal motion to the committee, that we formally request that the speaker give to us and add to our interim charges, one, to explore the credible claims of illegal gender modification and child abuse happening at Texas Children's Hospital, as well as I would like to see an investigation of the federal officials who may be involved in covering up and aiding and abetting that illegal child abuse. Is that something that we could make a motion? Could I make a motion for that we formally request an interim charge be added?
You know, I'd have to look through committee rules to see what the proper way to do that is. I've not seen that done in the past, but I think your statement's been made, and I think the message has been delivered.
I just want to make sure that we're protecting brave Texans,
I think
whistleblowers, exposing credible claims of criminal child abuse at Texas Children's Hospital.
And I second that motion.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative.
I do not have a motion right now. I don't understand the rules behind wanting how to procedurally do that. I wasn't prepared for that.
If I were to make
Happy to look through it.
If I
and
were to
something
make the
we
motion
talk about.
formally and Representative Schatzline has in fact seconded it, could that be a motion that the body considers today?
Okay. What I'm going to do right now, since this is something that we want to discuss up front, is I'm going to just stand at ease, and I'm going to go review some things in the rules. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, well done, Representative Schatzline and Representative Harrison. You can see that Joe Moody is just not used to Republican lawmakers having an intention to advance conservative policies and conversations in the course of the interim. This is not normal. One member was telling me about his first committee ever, right? So he's elected. This was actually in a special election. And so he goes into this interim hearing in a committee, and one of the Republicans, who's kind of a big Dade Phelan lieutenant at the time, looks to him and says, "Hey, just to let you know, we don't really ask questions during committees here. Okay? We definitely don't question the chairman, who was a Democrat chair at the time." And this Republican member is sitting there going, what do you mean we don't? It's like, I can ask whatever question I want. Or is there a rule against us asking questions of our chairman? No, but we just don't do that. Okay, well, now we're doing it. And to see how far we've come from that years ago to the exchange between Representative Schatzline and Harrison is just a breath of fresh air, right? We'll talk about a Dallas Morning News article just in a little bit. And the Dallas Morning News recently penned this article, and the headline is "Summer Tensions for Texas House Republicans Distracting from Work That Matters," some say, okay? Which is such a biased headline, but that's okay. And Cole Hefner and really Carl Tepper is the only one quoted in this article acting like we can't get to our work that matters, right? Now, here's what's so funny about this article. Before this happened, Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison said, "I want to have a conversation about the illegal immigrants that are killing Texans and the criminal penalties against them. I want to talk about whether they should be granted bail. I want to talk about strengthening, the penalties for the crimes that they've committed." Like, these are real serious conversations. And the way interim hearings work is that no bills are passing right now. So these committee chairs have exclusive authority to set their agenda for whatever they want to talk about during the interim. Traditionally, they basically use the interim charges that the speaker gives them as their limiting principle for what they can talk about. Now, this is not in the rules. They are not confined by the Constitution, by the laws or of the state, or by the rules of the Texas House. They can hear anything that fits within their jurisdiction. Some would argue that they could literally hear anything about anything. But let's just say at least within their jurisdiction, which is a very broad area for most of these committees. But the Democrat chairs, of course, are going to limit it to exactly what they want to talk about. And they're going to work with the speaker to make sure he only gives them things to work on during the session, during the interim portion of our legislative session that they want to work on. And here Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison are saying, well, I know what I want to work on. I know what my voters care about. I know what I was elected to do, and we're not doing a whole lot right now, so we have time. We could absolutely do this. Now, Steve Toth serves on the Committee on Corrections, which is the committee that oversees our entire justice system, the prison system in Texas, okay? And Steve Toth sent a letter just yesterday to his chairman, Representative Abel Herrero, another Democrat. See a pattern here? So another Democrat chairman who's chairing corrections. And here's what Steve Toth asked him. He said, Chairman Herrero, the continued burden on Texas to pay for services rendered to illegal aliens housed in Texas prisons and county jails continues to increase with no end in sight. The Texas prison system is for the incarceration and rehabilitation of convicted criminals. Instead, our prison systems have become a sanctuary providing housing, food, psychiatric and medical care for illegal immigrants. On behalf of Texas taxpayers, the following questions need to be answered. What is the number of illegal aliens housed in state and county facilities today? What is the total cost of housing, feeding, and medical care for these illegal aliens? How many guards have been assaulted by illegal aliens over the past 10 years? How many different counties are those illegal aliens from? How many of these illegal aliens are on the terrorist watch list? How many are from counties that have had illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list? Are any of these illegal aliens from nations on the terrorist watch list in with the general population, right? So are any of these illegal aliens who we're concerned about their international affiliations in the general population of the prison? Are these people being gaining access to just all criminals and being able to further organize? I am concerned that we are currently not asking the right questions. In addition to the enormous impact on the Texas budget, we also have to acknowledge the role it plays in retaining guards in the Texas jails and prisons. As a member of the Texas Corrections Committee, I am asking for a formal investigation in pursuit of these questions. This should be a relatively easy task, as all of this information should be readily available. Respectfully, Steve Toth. So this is Steve Toth sending a letter to his Democrat chair saying, hey, could you work on this issue? Right? Can we work on this issue as a committee? That's a great question. So this continues down the path of saying, this is what I want to work on. These are things that Texans care about. And I think when y'all hear that letter from Steve Toth, you go, yeah, I'd like to know the answer to all those questions. Why don't we know the answer to all those questions? Now, just days before that letter was sent by Steve Toth and days after Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison's interaction, the Dallas Morning News writes an article. Now, the Dallas Morning News is trying to correct the framing, okay? Remember, legacy media outlets will work hand in hand with the Dustin Burrows and the Dade Phelans of the world to try to keep this uniparty structure and regime in power. So they write this article, and a good example is like Carl Tepper is quoted in this article. And if you talk to most members of the Texas House and you say, hey, where's Carl Tepper on the situation in the Texas House, where the Texas House might go, the future of the legislature, almost all of them will tell you, well, he's wherever Dustin Burrows is, right? He is wherever Dustin Burrows is. Certain members, you look at it and you go, that guy could make a decision regardless of where Dustin Burrows is. And then some members, you go, that guy's not going to make a decision until Dustin Burrows makes a decision. And Carl Tepper is one of those people. Okay. So in the midst of this, Republicans actually putting pressure on Democrat chairs to say, we have more policy we want to work on. The Dallas Morning News writes an article saying summer tensions for Texas House Republicans is distracting from the work that matters. And they actually quote Representative Tepper here. He says, normally going into session is a fun exercise. We look forward to it. In this atmosphere with so many combative camps, there's a lot of uncertainty and consternation about how the session will unfold, right? It says the Dallas Morning News spoke to 20 House incumbents, candidates, and high-ranking staff members for this story, including 11 who declined to go on record when discussing internal House dynamics and how they impact legislation. Now, why? Why would they refuse to go on record? Because so many of the existing regime members will talk to members of the media and say, yeah, it's really hurting our chamber. But they won't go on record because the reality is they don't know where they stand. They don't know how this speaker's race is going to shake out. And they're all waking up to the reality that nobody's in a position, no single group or person is in a position to pick the next speaker. I think that's actually a good thing in the long run. I think that in the long run, what Republicans will likely wake up to the fact of is that no one's picking the next speaker, that the caucus, that there are two paths to go. One is that the Dade Phelan lieutenants team up with the Democrats and try to keep Dade in power for 2 more years. And that will result in a political bloodbath and a very painful 2 years. And they will not have to relegate 3 or 4 or 5 members to this, inferior status in the Texas House. They're going to have to take 40 people and say, you're now inferior, which is very dangerous and very difficult to do. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there are 5 members of the legislature today that would go to the floor with Dade Phelan. And I'll even say who I think they are. I think the 5 members that would go to the floor tomorrow with Dade Phelan, like he loses the caucus, they're like, we don't care. We're voting with Democrats. We're electing Dade. I think it's Charlie Guerin, Gary Van Dever, Stan Lambert, Drew Darby, and Morgan Meyer. That's who I think. Even these people who say, well, I'm voting for him, you kind of start to dig at it and you go, okay, this guy's just going to vote for Dade in the caucus if he runs. And that actually gets us to the money. Show me the money. I posted a link on Twitter to a sheet I put together, which is just basically all of the cash on hand, not the money raised and spent and all those numbers, but the cash on hand for sitting and incoming state representatives. So returning and incoming. And it's really fascinating. The most notable kind of situation is that Dade Phelan, the sitting speaker, is actually 8th in cash on hand. Okay. So just to give you perspective, like Greg Bonin, $1.6 million. He's the appropriations chairman. Todd Hunter, $1.2 million. He's the state affairs chair. Trent Ashby, who's a chairman and he's got $900,000. He had over $1 million, but he had a primary, had to spend some of that. Charlie Guerin, $738,000. Angie Chen Button, $738,000. Ryan Guillen, $700,000. Dustin Burrows, $700,000. And then you go to Dade Phelan, who has $535,000. Now, it would actually be a good thing long-term if the speaker, this is something the contract with Texas signers have talked about, that the speaker has become this centralized entity that raises like $4 or $5 million into his account and then dishes it out to everybody, and then they all owe him. And previously, the speaker would always give you a check and say, hey, I've got a PAC. Maybe Tom Craddock had a PAC and he'd give you $25,000 or something. But the speaker was not the source of your entire funding for your campaign or a big, huge chunk of your campaign funding. And that has shifted over the last 10 years. So for people who don't have a long-term perspective, they think it would be crazy to not have the speaker be this massive war chest guy who just dishes all this money out. But Dade Phelan sitting on $535,000 is a remarkable number in comparison to speakers for the last decade. And the interesting thing is he can't just put an invitation out and say, everybody give me a ton of money like he did last time. When he was nominated speaker, I have to go back and look at it, but it was millions of dollars that showed up within like a 4-week period of time. So it shouldn't be hard for him to replenish his account. The problem is none of the Austin lobby know if he's going to be the speaker. And they all actually do have a PAC budget. So these Austin lobbyists have a PAC budget, and they might have, so just so y'all understand kind of how some of the PAC budgets work. So an Austin lobbyist, an individual lobbyist, these people are registered, and then they will work for multiple trade associations, a couple businesses, a single one-off guy who has an interest in one issue, whatever. And they will kind of have their own internal budget. They'll say, hey, my income is $400,000 or $500,000, and I'm going to give out $25,000 a year. And I have to give the governor money because his staff helped me with that issue. And I have these businesses that have issues with the comptroller's office, so I need to give him some money to make sure I'm staying in good there. And I'm going to do this with the attorney general, or maybe this with whatever. They're going to dish out a little bit. And then they're going to say, well, my niche is healthcare policy. So I'm going to give a little bit more to the chairman of the committees of Health and Human Services and Public Health and Human Services. That's kind of my area. Maybe some members on that committee who carried a bill. So they have to prioritize that money, right? And this is their business. So if they have $25,000 or $50,000, they have to make sure they kind of spread it out. Now, associations have the same thing. So the home builders or the bankers or whatever, the emergency room, standalone emergency rooms, they have a PAC with a $200,000. And yeah, if Dade Phelan was going to be the returning speaker, you'd be like, hey, we need to get him $25,000. Great idea. But if he's not going to be, you don't want to write him the $25,000 check now, and then he doesn't become speaker, and then you got to write $25,000 to the next speaker, and then we don't even know who the chairman are going to be. So they just can't flood his account with tons of cash right now and then be caught in a situation in December where they've spent all their money on people who aren't even going to be as impactful in the process. So even the Austin lobby, who operate very much from a perspective of like our job is having access to politicians, have to carefully consider how much money they're pouring in to one member over another at this time. So Dade Phelan is sitting pretty low. I'm going to link in the email I send out to a list of all of these cash on hand numbers so that you can see. And then if you want to go to Twitter, you can just go there. I have it there. The other thing I will say in general is that a lot of incumbents spent a lot of money. And so you have a pretty significant dent that quite a few of these members took to accounts that they had been building up for quite some time. And that hit is now they're going to be working to replenish, but it goes to show the cost of picking all the fights that Dade Phelan picked. He picked so many fights and put so many of his guys in so much trouble that some of these guys who actually were on, course to building up an account with several $100,000, having some flexibility, instead have been relatively drained and are having to replenish all of their campaign accounts. So they're going to the lobby, they're hosting fundraisers and going to everybody they can to fill up. Dade Phelan is significantly underfunded at this time, though.
Howdy, folks. It's Chris Salcedo from the Salcedo Storm podcast. You might know me from my TV show on Newsmax or my radio show on AM 700 KSEV in Houston. As a veteran broadcaster, author, and conservative political analyst, I've teamed up with Texas Scorecard to take a no-nonsense approach to the toughest questions Americans are wrestling with every day. Join me on the Salcedo Storm podcast, where I challenge the status quo and bring you fresh perspectives on the national, state, and cultural news. Tune in weekdays, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm going to also close on a positive note and look at a clip that of an interview that Shelley Luther did with the Texas Public Policy Foundation on the Right Side podcast, which they have. And I just think that this is a breath of fresh air when it comes to the level of individuals we have going into the Texas House. So the little clips show up and they pop up, and I just think they're worth kind of bringing to you. Shelley's asked kind of this softball question about her role as a business owner, a woman. Okay, basically, how does your perspective as a female give you certain voices into issues, right? And the right does play a decent amount of the kind of identity politics that sometimes drives our conversation. But I love Shelley Luther's response. So let's go to this clip.
But I mean, from your perspective, is it important, do you think, to say that as a woman, as an activist, as a business owner, as a woman, I have something else to offer, something of even not greater value, but something of a different perspective, and it's important that me as a woman. Do you think it's okay for to put that forward and say, listen to me because I'm a woman?
No, I've never had that idea. I was raised by a Marine, a 26-year Marine veteran. The poor guy had 3 daughters, so we were kind of just treated as almost like his sons. I played softball my whole life. I know how to change a tire. I have changed a man's tire before.
How emasculating for him.
I mean, and I also golf, so I don't see myself. And obviously, I understand the differences between men and women, especially physically. But at the same time, I've never been like a feminist or someone's, women's rights or anything like that. I speak as an American and a Texan, and I think that's way more valuable than any other way.
Guys, I'm really excited about Shelley Luther coming to the Texas House. She is a good friend. She had her story, and we're going to have her on the podcast at some point before the end of the year to just share her testimony of God's provision and grace and mercy to her and his miraculous healing of her, which then opened up the opportunity for her to step into this race. And when you hear her story, y'all know her as the salon owner who opened up against the COVID orders and went to jail because of it, which is incredible. It shows the innate tenacity that she has. She's a force of nature. But what you also don't know is after she ran for Senate and lost, after she ran for the Texas House and lost, and losses can kick a lot of people out of politics. A lot of people show up on the political scene, they run for office, they lose, and then they go away. That's what they do. It's really sad because so many people who run for office, you meet them and you go, gosh, this guy might lose his county commissioner race, but he'd be a really good activist helping build up the party. He'd really be a good voice in property tax reform and relief. And they just go away. He could organize all these business owners in his industry to get more involved in the political process. No. Okay. But she didn't go away. And then she had a major health scare that she should have died from. Anyways, I'm not going to go into all the details, but she survived. God provided for her. And then all of a sudden, there was an opening to run for the Texas House again. And she did, a third time. And now she's going to be in the Texas House of Representatives. And I think she's going to be a force of nature this session. I think people, that little clip is just a small taste. It's the tip of the iceberg on the impact that Shelley will have on the conversation and framing, and how she just doesn't accept her opponent's framing. Now, I don't mean that by saying that like TPPF was her opposition in that way. I think that they were just asking her, hey, a lot of people speak into these woman issues. Do you speak into them as a woman? And she's like, no, I speak into these things as a Texan. And I think that matters more, which I'm just really proud of her overall perspective and how she will be governing this incoming session. There's a lot of other people to be happy about. So if you're one of them, or if you supported somebody else who got into the legislature, I'm sure they're going to be great, and with Shelley Luther as well. I'm actually trying to figure out how to facilitate some of these conversations. I might even do a separate series of conversations with a lot of the incoming state representatives, because they're kind of otherwise it's just going to take up like every single episode from now till the end of the year. That doesn't make sense. So I'm figuring that out on this side. But as you can see, imagine, Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison are putting some pressure on their Democrat chairs. Imagine next session when there aren't Democrat chairs and you have a 30, 40, 20 to 40 hard conservative fighters on any given day pushing to advance conservative policy, right? So Carl Tepper can tell the Dallas Morning News that they're having a hard time working on issues that matter because of all the tensions. But I'm telling you, a new day's coming in Texas, and we're going to keep building coalitions needed to ensure that that happens. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.
Do you want to get your news from people who share your values? Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.